To print with soluble supports, you first need a dual extruder 3D printer. So at TFS, that's going to be your Ultimaker S3. So switch over to that profile, and then the next thing we have to do is adjust the print cores. Now this is an Ultimaker thing, so if you had a different brand dual extruder printer, you wouldn't need to do anything with the cores. Now there's AA, BB, CC, and DD. At TFS, we just use AA and BB. And the difference is AA is for regular materials like PLA, PETG, while BB is for support materials like PVA. So for the first extruder, we're going to leave that on AA04, and 04 is the diameter. We generally just always use 04, and PLA filament. And don't try and print with PETG and PVA because soluble supports really are just for PLA filament. So leave it like this. You can set it to generic or Ultimaker PLA. Then for the second extruder, we need to change that to BB04. And when you do that, you actually need to make sure that the BB04 core is in the printer. So that's a physical part. I think most of the time it's just always going to be in the printer, but all you have to do to check that is open up the little door in front of the fan and you'll see if it says BB or AA. That can be switched out really easily as well, but it'll usually just be BB all the time. Then for the material, switch it to either Ultimaker or generic PVA. Now that stands for polyvinyl alcohol, and it dissolves. So now you have that set. The next thing is your settings. For your first extruder here, you don't really have to change anything unless you want different infill quality. Set that how you would with any other print. Now it's the second extruder where you have to change some stuff. So make sure you enable all settings so that we can see everything that we'll be working with in this video, and then scroll all the way down to supports. Now if you're using soluble supports, you want to generate supports. Let's show an example print. So Warner Bear. So this definitely needs soluble supports because, as you can see, it's hollow on the inside and then has to print over nothing when it goes and does the back of the bear. But you can't use normal supports because how are you going to take them out of the inside? So you need soluble supports for this print. But you don't always need soluble supports. If you can use normal supports, that's preferable because soluble supports are a lot more expensive. So we have that, and support extruder, you have to change to extruder 2. Basically, that just means to print the actual bear, we can right click here. We'll see it's going to use extruder 1 with PLA. And to print the supports, it'll use extruder 2, which has PVA filament. Then, for the support structure, we want normal. Placement, still everywhere. This is where you can change it a bit, depending on how much support coverage you want, but generally Ultimakers are good up to overhangs around 48 degrees. Doesn't really matter though, you can leave it at 45 if you want. Here is where you really have to use triangle supports. Zigzag is for regular supports, not soluble supports, whereas triangles will get great result with soluble supports. Then support density, that's way too high. That's going to use a ton of filament, so we want to decrease that to, let's say, 17 or 18%. Really though, you don't even need that much, maybe 15. You do want to support brim. That's going to allow it to stick to the build plate. Keep the width around, 8. Support Z distance. Now for regular supports, you don't leave that at 0. You have to have a certain clearance so that you can break it away after. That's basically the distance from the top of the support to the bottom of the print that's resting on it. So if you have that at 0, it'll fuse it together and it'll just stick. You can't break it off. But with soluble supports, you want it to be fused together because you don't have to break it, it'll just dissolve. XY distance, that doesn't, yeah, we can leave that there. Minimum support area, if you don't want certain parts supported, you might need to adjust that, but we don't really need to do anything for that right now. You definitely want to enable the support interface because that will allow it to be fully connected to the print, whereas regular supports, you still get that 15% density that we put in up there when it connects to the print, whereas if you add an interface, it basically prints an almost solid layer or a few layers right before the support meets the actual print. So for the thickness, I would suggest putting 0.4. You want the roof and floor, that's the interface. Then support interface resolution, that's basically, yeah, you can leave that. Interface density, you can also leave that at 100 because you want the actual print to be supported really well, and we aren't so concerned about filament savings here because it's only 0.4 millimeters thick, so you're not using a ton of support. Then zigzag, no, you still want triangles. You need the best results, and trust me, for soluble supports, you absolutely need triangles for everything. The rest can be left as is. Then build plate adhesion, you don't need to enable prime. Make sure you have brim because otherwise it just won't stick with soluble supports. Also, don't worry about having to cut things off because the brim should be done with extruder 2. You don't usually have to override that, but yeah, you can leave it like that, but it'll be with extruder 2. Then for dual extrusion, you need to enable the prime tower, which is basically a little tower in the corner. See that just popped up there? It'll be a cylinder straight up that each layer, it wipes the nozzle on the cylinder and extrudes a bit of filament so that when it goes to print the actual object, the bear, it'll be new filament without any burnt sticky stuff from the layer before, because when it's printing with the other extruder, the one that's not printing will retract and filament that's stuck on the end might burn up. So you want to get rid of that with the prime tower. The size of it you can probably leave. You need to make sure the position isn't on top of your print, but we see right here that's fine. Then right now that's okay too. So let's go ahead and save this profile as whatever. Okay, so we have that profile now, and we can slice. Okay, so it's done. We can look at the preview. Go from the top. See how the brim is done with the blue material? That's supports. So it'll be soluble filament. Then those really small triangles here and all around here are the support interface. Then as you go up, you can see you start to get this larger triangular pattern. So this and this outline is the support with the support density, not the support interface. What we see in here with the little blue triangles is a support interface. So that's the 0.4 millimeters touching the object. As we go up, you can see it continues to have support interface right before the object grows into the support, but around it, to save filament, it's just a larger, less dense structure. So here you can see the support interface. Yeah, again, it extends right before it touches the object. And then again, going back in, it's almost hollow in the middle, but by the time that you're extruding real material, then it's going to have the interface. So yeah, that's how soluble supports should look. Now I'm just going to show you what it would look like if we didn't have that interface, because that's something we don't use with normal supports, so not soluble. This is without the interface. See how now it's just fully composed of those really not dense triangles? They're really big, and you're not going to get that great a quality with this because you just don't have it touching the actual print quite as much, so you're not fully supporting it, basically. Again, though, we still do see a little bit, as in the blue goes right next to it, but it just doesn't get quite as good a coverage. Whereas the triangles are they're really fine, right? So they're touching it on all the area it possibly can. And triangles, always use them. Don't use zigzags for soluble supports. So that's pretty much it. And then again, you can change those other settings like layer height as long as you don't go above 0.2, and you shouldn't really go below 0.1 either, so keep it in that range. Then you can also change the infill, of course, the infill pattern. That doesn't really matter for the supports. That's just the actual print, like any other print. The supports, just remember, triangles support interface of 0.4 millimeters and a density of about 15%.